Hi, my name is Christian Devine and welcome to Retro Review, a safe zone for physical media. I thought for this special edition we would do something that I've been wanting to do for a while, which is examine a few different kind of movies in a more rapid-fire, lightning round manner, because I've got so many movies and there's only so much time and I can't retro review everything. So I thought, in honor of the Criterion Collection and the recent sale they just had at 50% off at Barnes Noble, that we would do an edition of my Criterion shelf, which is the top shelf of my movie collection. You know, Criterion meaning standards, so I thought keep them at the top, even though they're now kind of expanding a bit. And I've always been a big Criterion fan since their Laserdisc days, even though I didn't have a Laserdisc, but friends did and I could rent a Laserdisc. And I love Criterion because I was always kind of an aspect ratio geek from a very early age, so that was one of the benefits of having the Criterion Collection, is that they would, try to show films in their favored format. And the stereo sound was great. They have extra features, deleted scenes, etc., etc. And even in 1990, I was making a joke about a future Criterion Collection version of Xanadu, which never manifested, but there's been a lot more variety over the years and a lot less of kind of cinephile elitism. They were doing James Bond films early on, though, but I think over the past 15 years, they've really embraced all sorts of different genres. The fact that there's a John Waters collection in Criterion and Bruce Lee and Godzilla is pretty amazing. So let's get into it, and we're just going to kind of go through it. I'll just grab some Criterions and discuss a Criterion that I just got from the Barnes Noble sale, and it's the most fascinating Criterion collection that I've ever gotten, Okay, so let's start from the top. That would be America Lost and Found, the BBS story. Now, Edgar Wright, when he just did his second Criterion, pulled this out. It's one of my favorite sets. BBS, of course, changed Hollywood in the late 60s with Easy Rider and led to really the birth of the new Hollywood with Last Picture Show, directed by Peter Bogdanovich, and Five Easy Pieces, directed by Bob Rafelson and others. And of course, once again, Easy Rider was the progeny and made on a $350,000 budget. In 1969, it made about $20 million that year and totally rocked the studio system, which were making elephantine musicals and roadshows that were not doing well. And so it was really the beginning of a whole new generation of film audiences and filmmaking. And the BBS set is really beautiful, one of my favorite Criterion collections because I'm fascinated by this era. And this will act as kind of my tribute to Henry Jaglom, who was an actor, writer, producer, director, and he was the editorial consultant on Easy Rider. He basically took away the 5-hour version that Dennis Hopper wanted and whittled it down to a sleek 90 minutes. And of course, that 5-hour version is one of the most mythic, lost films of all time, and all that footage must be available somewhere. Anyway, I contacted Henry when I moved to Hollywood, when I was working on my Skidoo projects and other projects about films of the 60s, and he was fantastic. He grilled me mercilessly about BBS to see what I knew, and I think, passed the test. And he's a wonderful curmudgeon. Whatever you think about his movies, he was a genuine auteur, and he invited me to immediately come see a cut of his film festival at Cannes and some other films, and invited me to my first Hollywood premiere where Karen Black sang to me. And last time I saw him was at a screening of How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying in Los Angeles with Robert Morse. And he's also the hippie who psychs out in one of my third favorite psychedelic films from the 60s, Psych Out, directed by Richard Rush. So, America Lost and Found, the BBS story. Get it, watch it, and have yourself an education through the Hollywood new cinema. Okay, now, don't you forget about The Breakfast Club. And the fact that this is on Criterion is kind of amazing. And because I'm having a high school reunion this year, this was Don't You Forget About Me was our class theme song, basically. And I saw this on opening night when it came out at Birdcage Walk Theater, a suburb of Sacramento, with some friends. And I had already been aware of John Hughes because of his stories in National Lampoon. I was a big National Lampoon fan, and National Lampoon was kind of like the point after Mad Magazine, comics and Mad Magazine, and you get into heavy metal for the, you know, the sex and violence art and adult content, and then you start reading National Lampoon for the kind of perversion of everything holy in our culture. And his stories in the National Lampoon are a lot different than his films. They're very sharply written, they're very sharp wit, but his stories in Lampoon were savage and merciless. And he never quite made films on that level, which I think is too bad. And it's also why I didn't totally buy some of the emotional manipulation in his films, because I knew what he had been writing in Lampoon. But we are large, we contain multitudes, and I do believe John Hughes is one of the most underrated directors, not just writers, but directors of the 80s, because he was really one of the first directors to use a meta postmodern style of filmmaking, to use, you know, outside sources of music like the Star Wars theme and Ferris Bueller and 16 Candles, using all sorts of different cues, Peter Gunn, etc. And he's got a really sharp, kind of because of his advertising background, kind of a sharp style of direction, and he doesn't get enough credit for the kind of really, you know, nicely put together his films are. So I had a lot of mixed feelings about Breakfast Club. I loved the entire stage play-like setting of it. I thought that was brilliant, to get a bunch of teenagers to sit still for a movie where characters just basically talking for a couple hours. I loved Anthony Michael Hall, who I really thought was, you know, to me, like a shining comic star. When I first saw him in 16 Candles, I was blown away. And I like the fact that me and Kubrick saw 16 Candles at the same time. We were both blown away. And Kubrick said that he thought Anthony Michael Hall's performance in 16 Candles was the greatest film debut of an actor since Jack Nicholson in Easy Rider, which is why Kubrick wanted to cast Anthony Michael Hall as Joker in Full Metal Jacket. That's a whole other story. And that is truly one of, like, to me, one of the great what-ifs of film history, because I really do. Matthew Modine is fine in the film, but I think that film was made for Anthony Michael Hall. So I love The Breakfast Club, you know, for what it was, and it was speaking to my generation. I actually loved the Simple Minds theme song, and I always thought John Hughes, of all the filmmakers of the 80s, you know, got us teens the most. But you know, you can say what you want about, but the film plays much differently now to younger audiences. But, you know, this film played exactly, to me, the way that young people probably see now. Or Molly Ringwald, who wrote a really piercing, insightful piece about watching The Breakfast Club with her daughter, and about, you know, some of the things that wouldn't fly today. And I thought it was kind of a white plight movie, and every character blames their parents, which I thought was not necessarily realistic, you know, to how things worked. And I did not like John Bender at all. I hated the fact that he was supposed to be like this voice of, you know, like reason, getting everybody together. But outside of that, there's some terrific acting. Anthony Michael Hall is fantastic. And the scene with Emilio Estevez talking about how he got there and what he did to a kid in school is really beautifully written and shot and acted. And it takes the film to a whole new empathetic level. But nonetheless, I get very nostalgic watching The Breakfast Club, and I'm glad it's on Criterion, and it looks fantastic. There's a new 4K out. I don't think I need to upgrade to 4K with this, but it may. I'm not sure if it has a Dolby Atmos sound, because the soundtrack would be great to have. And of course, I'd love to see the longer version, so don't you forget about them. Because we can't just do American films. We have to do the template for the new Hollywood from 1960. I taught a film class at Berkeley called Medium Cool, Groundbreaking Films of the 60s. And I started with Jean-Luc Godard's Breathless, because it basically set the template for the postmodern Hollywood film. And this is, I would argue, is the first postmodern film, because of the shot where Jean-Paul Belmondo looks at the poster of Humphrey Bogart and mimics him. And there's all sorts of meta moments, and, you know, change Hollywood editing because of the kind of elliptical fast editing that didn't necessarily follow linear, you know, reasoning. And it's a quick 90 minutes, and for a foreign film, it plays like lightning. You know, it's an existential, you know, B-movie noir. And Gene Seberg, who was discovered by Otto Preminger, but not so successfully in his films, this film really, you know, made her a star, and Jean-Paul Belmondo an international sex symbol. So, and I do want to see Richard Linklater's new film Nouvelle Vogue about the making of Breathless. It looks fantastic. So, Breathless, must get. That's a must own for cinema fans. Equinox. This is one of my favorite Criterion releases, and it's a DVD set, so I doubt if they'll upgrade to Blu-ray. You may not need to for this because it's the most DIY Criterion collection edition. And Equinox, for those who don't know, is a short horror film made in 1967 by Dennis Muren and a lot of the future Oscar winners for Star Wars. And it's basically kind of an Evil Dead setup, and definitely Evil Dead was influenced by this film, which doesn't get brought up a lot. But, you know, some picnickers end up discovering this tape recording and an evil legend and demons. And it was basically a showcase for these really great special effects in '67. And Jack Harris, the producer who did The Blob and later on John Carpenter's Dark Star, he did what he usually do, which is throw some money at it, cut out some stuff, and then released it very successfully, actually. And so what's great about this, it's 2 discs and it contains the original short and then the theatrical release. And the original short is much better to me because it's more pure. It does have a couple laggy scenes, but there's more special effects, more animation, and I love all the animation. The Taurus monster in this is one of my favorite stop motion monsters of all time. And this is just a lot of fun. And this has just got a wealth of incredible, you know, extras on it, commentaries, and best of all, deleted, you know, animated outtakes and all sorts of shorts. So you could probably still pick this up on the Criterion site or, you know, Barnes Noble, etc. And it's probably pretty cheap, probably 20 bucks or so, even less than that you can get it. But Equinox. And now we come to one of my favorite films of all time, and so pertinent to our era. It's a mad, 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 mad world. Whenever I feel depressed about the world, I pop this film in because it makes me feel sane, and I like to watch it once a year. I've always loved this film since I was a kid, and of course new generations, you know, will have a different, this will hit differently because, you know, I grew up knowing who Jack Benny was and Rochester and all the, you know, character actors and comics, Sid Caesar throughout. And so it still works, I think, on a different level, but knowing who these people are kind of, you know, plays up a lot more of their humor and persona. Seeing glimpses of Jerry Lewis, etc. And Stanley Kramer directed this, and Stanley Kramer was known for his dramas, very sincere, liberal dramas, Judgment at Nuremberg, Inherit the Wind, which is an amazing film, etc., etc. And he made his first and only all-out comedy, and maybe he wasn't necessarily the right person to do it, but I love the fact that he decided to make this, you know, 70mm Cinerama epic roadshow comedy. I love roadshow movies. I love intermissions. I love this whole genre of 60s films, even though they did you know, become elephantine productions. And this is also a tribute to the late Michael Schlesinger, the #1 It's a Mad, 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 Mad World fan, who's got an audio commentary in here, and he acted as a conduit to getting a lot of great films released, including the 80s re-release of The Manchurian Candidate. And Robert Harris did an amazing restoration of it. This is one of the best Criterion movies you can watch, and because of the nature of the Cinerama and the 70mm Super Panavision, it just looks fantastic. And there's a Blu-ray and DVD thing, and I'm sure they're going to upgrade this to 4K at some point because there's still footage missing. It's been restored. There's multiple versions of the film on here, and you know, it's just an incredible set and one of my favorites, and highly recommended. So definitely pick this up and watch it on the bigger screen, the better. And you know, and it also has the greatest tribute to the Three Stooges ever on film. So now we come to something very interesting. This is the brand new Criterion Collection edition of Les Samouraï by Jean-Pierre Melville, one of my favorite films and one of John Woo's favorite films. And it's been upgraded to 4K. And so when I got the film, I wanted to check it out and compare it to the other Criterion edition, and this is what was inside here. 2 white discs that don't play at all. You can't get more existential than that. This is the most bizarre physical media release I've ever received in history. And I will, of course, be, you know, hopefully sending this back or getting a I don't need to send it back. They need to send me a new version of it. But I'm gonna, like I said, it's existential, and I love this film, so I'm excited to see how it looks in 4K. But in the meantime, I've still got my previous Criterion. I don't like to double dip either, unless there's going to be a substantive upgrade, and based on everything I've read, it does look much better. Although I once again wish, if you're going to do an upgrade, please throw in a couple little more extras. They've got some nice extras on here, but it'd be nice to have a couple, more. Now let's see, what else do we have over here? Okay, Night of the Living Dead, 1968. One of the most important horror movies ever made. For me personally, still the scariest movie of all time. And that's so subjective, it's just not a debatable point. Everybody's got their own idea what's scary. And there's probably been some scary movies, of course, made since then, but this to me affects me as a kid, terrified me. The trailers terrified me. I love the fact that it actually premiered on TV in 1972 on Bob Wilkins' legendary Creature Features show here in Northern California. And this 4K version looks superb. And when they restored it in the 90s, you just realize what a beautiful film it actually looks like, and it looks like a noir, zombie film, if there is one, maybe more expressionist zombie film. Everything about the film plays beautifully still to this day, and it just has one of the greatest, endings in horror film history. And of course, there's all sorts of political ramifications with having a black lead in the film, and it just adds to the mystique of the film, and just genuinely unnerving and disturbing to this day. And this is one of my favorite Criterion releases. Once again, the fact that Night of the Living Dead is on Criterion Collection is amazing. Let's jump up here and quick shout out to 4K of Sorcerer, which I just got, and I did my retro view of Sorcerer, which you can go back and see, and I hope you do, and I might do another retro view of this. But suffice to say, it's an interesting upgrade, because there's always been a lot of color issues sometimes with Friedkin's film, because he liked to mess with things and added some sound to certain films and changed the color. And there's 2 soundtracks on here, and all I'll say is watch the original soundtrack release, the 2.0 surround, because it doesn't have this added gunshot in the film that kind of changes the kind of outcome to a scene. But it looks fantastic in 4K upgrade. There's some nice little extras on here, great interviews with Wallen Green, and this is just one of my favorite films, and definitely pick this up from Criterion. And something that's not a bad companion piece to Sorcerer is Andrei Tarkovsky's science fiction, existential, dreamlike effort, or epic, Stalker, which I only saw recently until a few years ago, and this is the first time I saw it was with this Criterion release, which was pretty celebrated because it was a 2K digital restoration, and previous versions just never looked that great. There's some debate about this version because there's an interesting color tint to the black and white scenes, and that's not on the Russian version, the Mosfilm version, that you can actually watch on YouTube in a pretty good print. So it's definitely worth checking out both versions. They both have different subtitles, but I think the subtitles on here are the most effective. And when I saw Stalker, it took me a few viewings to watch it, because there's something about this film that's so dreamy and sleepy that it makes me fall asleep watching it, which I actually think is one of the few films that you should fall asleep watching Stalker, because the characters are always curling up into piles of grass, etc., and falling asleep and having these little, kind of dream moments. And, if you've seen Tarkovsky, you know the pacing of his films, and my, deepest film cut joke, or my deepest cut film joke, is that, Tarkovsky makes Ozu look like Robert Rodriguez, and so you have to prepare yourself for the kind of, pacing of the film. And that there's, I think, only like 100 or so plus scenes in this entire movie, cuts. So that's not very much. But what you're seeing, those images are amazing. There's a lot of Lynchian quality, David Lynchian quality to the films. And I'm obsessed with Stalker because it was shot in 2 different versions. And they discovered they were using some bad film stock for the first version, and they reshot it with a different cinematography. There's a whole controversy about this, and I would love to see that original first cut they did of Stalker. Unfortunately, the film was burned up along with the editor in her Russian apartment in a fire. But there's lots of footage probably in the vaults at Moss Film. Apparently they were doing lots of behind-the-scenes footage, which we've never seen, and it's quite a different looking movie, although there's a couple shots from the original print in here. Anyway, Stalker is an amazing film. It's truly science fiction, and the novel that it's based on, Roadside Picnic, I just recently read, and that's really one of the best books I've ever read. So this is a great Criterion Collection, and I'd like to see this upgraded to 4K with an audio commentary. And last, but certainly not least, Until the End of the World by Wim Wenders. I saw this originally in its 1992 disastrous release, where it was chopped down from a 5-hour plus original version to a 2-hour version. It still had an effect on me, and it truly has one of the greatest soundtracks in movie history, pop soundtracks. Just, Depeche Mode, next to REM, next to Elvis Costello, next to Julie Cruz. It's just great, and I love this movie. It's the ultimate, it's a science fiction road trip around the world starring William Hurt, and this is the 5-hour version basically, which you can watch across a couple nights, so to break it up, you don't need to watch it all in one piece. It's a great New Year's Eve movie though, because it takes place on New Year's, and it's, there's something about foreign films that I've always thought, like, just when you think it should end, and it's at a perfect ending point, it goes on for another hour and a half. And once you kind of accept that a lot of foreign films don't reward you narratively in the way American films do, but this is a really wonderful, beautiful film, and I love the way it ends, and it's maybe Wim Wenders' most optimistic film. And it predicts a lot of things about, our technology, and it's built around a kind of virtual reality dream device, which is pretty amazing. It's got some, parts that once again slow down and meander a bit, but that's kind of the vibe of Wim Wenders, and you have to kind of accept it. But this is a beautiful looking transfer. Then Wim Wenders kept the negative himself, so it's looked in some fantastic shape, and it's got a great 5.1 surround sound and extra footage, etc., etc. So if you haven't seen Until the End of the World, kick back and enjoy, because sometimes it does feel like the end of the world, but as long as we're collecting our physical media, we're still here. So thank you for retro viewing, and I hope that my Criterion shelf has inspired you to go maybe pick up a couple of things. The sale is almost over, but you can always shop around, and we'll probably do this again, because there's other Criterions I want to talk about but don't necessarily want to do a whole retro view on. And so once again, thank you for retro viewing, and ciao.